There are arguments in baseball that stay in the dugout. And then there are arguments that change everything. What happened between Shohei Ohtani and Max Muncy was not a disagreement about strategy. It was not a difference of opinion about pitch selection or base running or the kind of small tactical debate that teammates have and forget before the final out is recorded. What happened in that dugout was something older and heavier and far more difficult to contain. It was the moment when everything a team had been holding beneath the surface finally broke through. And once it broke, nothing looked the same. The Dodgers had been building toward this game for 2 weeks. Not in the way that teams build toward a rivalry series or a playoff push. In the quieter, more dangerous way. The way that losing streaks build. The way that missed opportunities accumulate. The way that a roster full of talented, competitive, proud professionals begins to feel the specific pressure of a season that is not going the way anyone planned. Every team reaches this moment eventually. The question is never whether it comes. The question is what it looks like when it does. And whether what breaks open in that moment destroys something or clears the air for something better. What happened in the Dodgers' dugout in the 9th inning answered that question in a way nobody expected. The game was still alive when Max Muncy came to the plate. 1 run down. 2 outs. The kind of at-bat that entire seasons get remembered by. The kind that players talk about in spring training years later, not always because of what they did right, but sometimes because of what the moment revealed about them when the weight of it was at its heaviest. The stadium understood what was at stake. The dugout understood it even more clearly. Ohtani was in the on-deck circle. He had been watching the at-bat develop the way he watches everything, with that particular stillness that looks calm from the outside but is, in reality, an almost frightening level of focus. He was ready. His whole body was ready. Everything about the way he stood, the way he held the bat, the way his eyes tracked the pitcher's preparation, communicated one thing. He wanted that at-bat. He had been building toward that at-bat for 9 innings. And then Max Muncy swung. The ball left the bat wrong. Every hitter knows the feeling immediately. Before the ball lands. Before the fielder moves. Before the crowd reacts. The hands know. The body knows. The specific, sickening vibration of a swing that connected with the wrong part of the ball at the wrong angle tells you everything in the fraction of a second before reality confirms it. Ground ball. Routine. Second baseman. 1 step. 1 throw. 1 out. Game over. The stadium exhaled the way stadiums exhale when something they had been holding on to is taken from them suddenly. Not a groan, exactly. More like the sound of collective deflation. Of hope that had been real and specific suddenly becoming past tense. Muncy stood at the first base line for a moment. He didn't sprint out of the box. He took 2 steps and slowed and then stopped, because the play was already over before he had taken 3 strides, and everyone on the field and in the dugout and in the stands already knew it. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds that the Dodgers will be discussing for the rest of this season. Ohtani was still in the on-deck circle when the final out was recorded. He stood there for a moment. The same way he had stood there before, in that game weeks earlier that the entire country had talked about, but this time something was different. This time the stillness was not processing. It was not the quiet of a man absorbing a difficult outcome with the grace that has come to define him in the public eye. This time, the stillness lasted exactly 1 second. And then he walked directly into the dugout. And directly toward Max Muncy. The people who were there describe it differently depending on where they were standing. Some say Ohtani's voice was controlled. That the words were sharp and deliberate and measured in the way that only makes them more cutting, not less. Some say the volume was low enough that only the players nearest to them heard the full exchange. Some say it was the expression, more than the words, more than the volume, that made everyone in that dugout stop what they were doing and go completely still. What everyone agrees on is this. Ohtani looked at Muncy and said something that began with his name. And the way he said it left no room for misinterpretation. Max Muncy. Are you out of your mind? Not a question. Not a shout. Something colder and more precise than either of those things. The kind of sentence that a person produces when they have been holding something back for a long time and have finally decided, with complete clarity, to stop holding it. The dugout froze. Max Muncy is not a man who backs down. That is one of the things that has defined his career in Los Angeles. The willingness to stand in against the hardest pitchers in the game. The refusal to give an at-bat away. The competitive edge that has made him valuable in situations where lesser players might shrink. So when Ohtani's words landed, Muncy didn't look away. He turned. And what came back across that dugout was not an apology, and it was not an explanation, and it was not the kind of measured response that a player gives when he knows he is wrong and is trying to manage the damage. What came back was something raw and immediate and honest in the brutal way that only genuine frustration can be honest. Try batting in the 9th inning. 5 words. Delivered with the full weight of a man who had just failed in the most public way possible and was not yet ready to be told about it by someone who had been standing in the on-deck circle watching. The temperature in that dugout changed in an instant. What happened in the seconds after that exchange is where the accounts begin to diverge. Some describe a physical moment. Not a fight. Not the kind of thing that makes highlight reels and generates suspensions and becomes the only story anyone tells about a team for the rest of the month. But a moment of proximity. Of 2 men in a confined space with elevated heart rates and the specific chemical charge of competition that hasn't fully wound down yet, standing closer to each other than the words between them should have allowed. Others describe it differently. Say that what looked physical from across the dugout was actually something more complicated. 2 men in each other's space, yes. But also 2 men who had been teammates long enough that even in that moment, even at the peak of whatever that was, there was something underneath it that wasn't quite anger. Or wasn't only anger. What everyone agrees on, again, is what happened next. Dave Roberts was there within seconds. Roberts has managed enough baseball to know the difference between an argument that needs to be stopped and an argument that needs to be witnessed. He knows the difference between the kind of tension that damages a team and the kind that, if handled correctly, can become the moment a team decides what it actually is. What it's willing to demand from itself. What standard it holds itself to when the games are real and the pressure is real and the on-deck circle matters. He stepped between them. Not aggressively. Not with the energy of a man trying to prevent something from escalating. With the particular calm of a manager who has calculated, in the space of 3 seconds, exactly what this moment requires. He said something to Muncy first. Quietly. Directly. The words were not audible to most of the people in the dugout. Then he turned to Ohtani. Whatever passed between Roberts and Ohtani in that moment lasted less than 10 seconds. But when it was over, Ohtani moved to the far end of the dugout. And Muncy sat down on the bench and stared at the floor. And the dugout slowly, carefully, began to breathe again. The clubhouse afterward was not loud. Winning clubhouses are loud. Losing clubhouses have their own sounds, the particular quiet of men processing defeat, punctuated by the clatter of equipment and the low murmur of conversations that don't go anywhere. But this clubhouse was something different. Something beneath even the normal losing clubhouse register. It was the sound of a team that had lost a game and also witnessed something that changed the internal atmosphere of what they were part of. Players dressed quickly. Conversations were short. Nobody brought it up directly. But everybody was thinking about it. The disciplinary action came the following morning. The Dodgers organization did not release a detailed statement. Professional sports organizations rarely do in situations like this, because detailed statements create more questions than they answer and invite the kind of prolonged public discussion that no team wants when it is trying to move forward. What was confirmed, through sources close to the situation, through the kind of careful, attributed to nobody language that sports journalism runs on, was that Max Muncy had been spoken to formally. That the conversation had involved Roberts, a member of the front office, and Muncy himself. That it had been direct. That it had addressed not just what happened in the dugout but the pattern that had led to that at-bat in the ninth inning and the response that followed it. The word used, in the careful language of professional sports discipline, was accountability. Muncy would face consequences. The specific shape of those consequences was not made public in full. But the message from the organization was clear enough that nobody who heard it needed it translated. This is not acceptable. Not here. Not on this team. Not now. Roberts met with the media the following afternoon. He walked in looking the way he sometimes looks after a night that required more of him than managing a baseball game. A little heavier. A little quieter. The expression of a man who has spent the intervening hours thinking about things that don't appear in any coaching manual. The first question was direct. Can you confirm that disciplinary action was taken against Max Muncy following last night's incident? Roberts nodded once. We addressed it internally. That's where it will stay. The follow-up came immediately. What's the current relationship between Ohtani and Muncy? Is there concern about clubhouse chemistry going forward? Roberts looked at the reporter for a moment before answering. The pause was not evasion. It was the pause of a man choosing words the way someone selects the right tool for a job that requires precision. These are competitors. They're going to feel things intensely. What happened last night was a reflection of how much both of those guys care about winning. My job, and I take this seriously, is to make sure that care gets directed in the right way. We had that conversation. We'll move forward. He paused once more. I'll say this. I've managed a lot of players. The ones who care enough to get angry in that dugout are almost always the ones you want on your side in October. Both of those guys fall into that category. The room absorbed that. Muncy addressed the media separately. He came in without the bravado that sometimes accompanies his public appearances. He sat down. He placed both hands flat on the table. And before any question was asked, he spoke. I let the team down last night. Not just with the at-bat. With how I responded after. That's on me. A reporter asked him about the exchange with Ohtani. Whether he had spoken with him since. Muncy nodded. We talked. That's between us. He stopped. Then, quietly, he holds himself to a standard that most people can't understand from the outside. I respect that. Even when it's hard to hear. Nobody in the room pushed further. Because something about the way Muncy said it communicated that whatever had happened between them in the hours since the dugout, whatever conversation had taken place, whatever had been said that wouldn't be made public, had moved something. Had shifted something. Not erased it. Not made it clean and simple and resolved. But moved it somewhere that two teammates could continue from. Ohtani did not speak to the media about the incident directly. He answered questions about the game. About the at-bat he never received. About the team's position in the standings and the games coming up on the schedule. But at the very end, when the formal questions were finished and the recorders were being put away, one reporter asked him something off the script. Do you feel the team is still united? Ohtani looked at the reporter. Then he looked at the table. Then he said something that was 3 words long and was not translated immediately, so the room waited for the interpreter, and when the interpretation came it landed quietly in the space between all the louder things that had been said in the preceding 24 hours. We have to be